What's going on, everybody? It is Wednesday, which means it is my favorite video by far of the week. 5 questions again from all of you to me, opinion-based questions. My opinion is just an opinion, as we know. And as many of you have pointed out, there have been times that maybe my opinion wasn't great, but it was my opinion. So if you don't agree with it, I always encourage you to take a minute and tell me why you don't. If you have a question that you'd like me to answer and give my take on in an upcoming episode, down below, please just post in the comments, just down to the comments, just post your question. If I do not hit your question this week, ask it again next week, and I will eventually get to every single question, I promise. So, 5 questions this week. First question coming right now. I have been a sports card collector since 1983 and seen a lot of changes over the years. Over the last few years, I think we have seen a huge growth of sports card shows and new shops. Where do you see the growth of shops and shows going? This is such a fun question because you say 1983 when you started collecting, and I literally remember the moment I became a card collector. It was 1987, and I was at a garage sale looking for a bike for my brother. And my dad and my brother and I were going garage sailing to find him a bike. And while we were there, I saw, for the first time ever that I remember, a baseball card binder and pages to put cards into. And I had a couple of cards laying around, but I had never really thought about like collecting and like keeping the cards and like putting them in pages and like looking at them. So sure enough, we bought the binder and we bought the pages, and my card collecting took off because now I had a place to put them. And again, that was in 1987. I remember driving to, it was like I think it was the orthodontist's office. And I was driving to the orthodontist's office, and this again would have been in 1987. So I'm like 8 years old. And we're driving, and I look over and I see a sign at this little shopping center that says sports cards. And the name of the place was called Cards and Cards. And it was a sports card shop. And I was like, Dad, can we go there? And he was like, yeah, I mean, after your appointment, we can swing by and see what's going on. And we went in, and it was the first time I ever went into a baseball card shop. Cards and Cards was only there for about a year. But directly across the street, there was another card shop called the Boys of Summer. And last I checked, I think the Boys of Summer still existed. And this is in Vacaville, California, which is, just outside of the Bay Area of Northern California. And there was this explosion of card shops. And sure enough, before I knew it, there were 4 or 5 in Sacramento. There were a couple in Vacaville, a couple in Fairfield nearby. There were quite a bunch of shops. And then just as quickly as it exploded, most of them went away. And it was probably by about 1994 or 95 that they were all pretty much gone, other than our favorite card shop, Batter Up, and then the Boys of Summer, which still has been around for a really long time. And it's interesting because a lot of those card shops went away, and then recently they're starting to pop back up, right? And as there's been this explosion where people are like in lines to get, new wax cases and stuff at, Target or Walmart or wherever, the card shops have popped back up, and the card collecting and the shows have popped back up as well. Now, the National has always been going, And certain shows have been very regular. The regular Sacramento Card Show that I've featured many times in videos, which is quarterly in the Sacramento area, it has been going on for like over 20 years. It's been going and going and going. It has not gone away. A lot of those shows have a lot of deep roots. But then there was this explosion recently. And obviously a lot of that explosion has to do with so many people entering or re-entering the hobby during the whole COVID thing. And the question is whether it's going to stay or not. It's really a tough call, but a lot of card shops revolve around wax. They revolve around modern cards. Quite frankly, not to be a pessimist, but I think that the explosion of the modern card market is probably going to implode, similar to the junk wax era of my childhood. If that happens, I think a lot of those card shops will struggle. But that being said, the amount of money that's thrown around with modern cards, it doesn't take too many sales of some of these expensive cards in order to pay your rent and pay your overhead. So will they continue? I certainly hope so. In the Sacramento area, there are a couple of card shops, near me. And there's a couple of smaller ones and a couple of bigger ones. And, what will happen? Really, really tough to say. But I think there will probably be more than there were 5 or 10 years ago. But I don't think there will be as many as there are right now. Just because of what I expect to be some struggles of the modern card market. Show-wise, the National is going to stick around for a while. I think the Burbank Card Show, the Dallas Card Show, the Chantilly Card Show, I think a lot of those big regional shows are here to stay. There's all this news about the Fanatics having, like a card show experience thing. I think that's probably around to stay. I hope all of the card shows are around to stay. But whether we're going to have as many in 3 years as we have right now or over the last 2, unfortunately, I think maybe not. But I think that's mostly, again, dependent on what happens with the modern card market. And it's one of the reasons I'm really rooting for modern cards, even though I'm not a big collector of them. What do you remember about your very earliest days in collecting in regards to the condition considerations? I started in 1981, and centering was never thought of that I remember. It was about creases and less about worn corners. So, great question. I have very similar memories of this. I remember when I would look at a card at a card show when I was younger. And I mean, for me, it was like 1988, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94. That was sort of like my prime of collecting. And even then, I was really kind of a vintage. And to me, vintage meant like early 80s, 70s, few 60s. I think my oldest card that I bought when I was that age had a 1961 Eddie Matthews card. And one of the things that I remember is, first, does it have a crease? If it has a crease, it's out. I'm not interested. But again, I'm looking at cards from like the 80s. And so a crease, the card, not an option. After that, it was corners. It went creases, then corners. If the corners were bad, I was probably not buying the card. And centering was by far the next thing. A lot of people didn't really care about centering. And to be honest with you, a lot of people didn't even care about corners. I went to a show, so I've mentioned this before, but in the San Francisco Bay Area, there was always Labor Day weekend, a huge card show at the Moscone Center. It later went over to the Fashion Center, and it was around for quite a few years. And I remember one year, I was a Clemens collector because Roger Clemens was my guy. The Clemens card I still had that I couldn't find one that I liked was a 1985 Fleer Roger Clemens. That was the card I did not yet have in my collection that I was looking for. And I went up to this dealer, and this dealer had a stack, and it was a good 2 inches tall of Clemens 1985 Fleer cards. I mean, he had to have 80 or 90 of them. And I was actually into centering at the time as well, even though most people weren't. So he just goes to grab me the one on top, and I'm like, no, can I look through them? And I literally went through all of them, and all of them had either a dinged corner or centering issues. And I went through every single one. And again, this is like maybe 89. So I'm 10 years old. And I went through every one. I'm like, nope, none of those are acceptable. And I hand the whole stack back to the dealer. And he looks at me and goes, none of those were good enough, huh? And I'm like, no. Because I was really into condition, and I was really into corners and centering. So I do remember this. And what I remember growing up was creases, absolutely not. Corners had to be nice. Centering, prefer if it was nice. But if it was for me as a 10-year-old, the Grail card, like the 85 Fleer Clemens, and I knew there were like 500 of them in the room that day, had to be centered too. So I did care about centering even back then. For me now, completely changed. And a big part of the reason it's changed is because I'm not looking for cards from 1985 so much anymore. I'm looking for cards from 1955 or 1935. And I realized that just having the card and the card's existence in itself is the beauty. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to exist and not have anything distracting when I look at it. When you get autographs on cards, how do you decide which card you want signed? Always the rookie card, most expensive, favorite card? This is a really good question, especially for someone who does through the mail autographs like I do. So when I get a guy and I decide I'm going to send a card off to them through the mail for an autograph, I'm definitely thinking about several things. Now, when I was younger, you didn't get rookie cards autographed. If you got a rookie card autographed, it ruined the rookie card. You didn't want the rookie card autographed. You wanted a different card autographed. You wouldn't do that to the rookie card. Now that has completely changed since then. I'm a 49er fan growing up in Northern California, and one of my all-time favorite 49ers is Patrick Willis. And Patrick Willis is a through the mail autograph guy. And I was looking online, and I just actually sent it off like yesterday or the day before. His Bowman Chrome rookie card. Of course I want his rookie card signed. Recently I've sent off to Dennis Eckersley, and I sent his rookie card. I sent to Tom Glavine. I sent his rookie card. I sent to Ryan Sandberg. I sent to Wade Boggs. I've sent to a lot of guys. And if I have their rookie card, I send their rookie card. But at the same time, you don't want to send a card that is too valuable that if it gets lost in the mail, you don't have the card. So it kind of depends on the value. Now, if the value of the rookie card is under, say, $20, maybe $25, for me, I'm not sending the rookie card. If it's over $25, if it's under $25, I want the autograph on the rookie card. If it's a rookie card that is over $25, I'm not really going to risk the rookie card going through the mail. So as a result, I'm going to pick a card that looks good. Now, for me personally, a lot of cards in like the 70s especially had on the card like a facsimile autograph, right? I always thought it looked kind of weird when there was already the guy's autograph on the card and then you get the card autographed. So those cards I kind of eliminate from a card that I would send to get autographed. So I want a card, when I'm looking for a card that has a good picture of the guy and also an area that is available to sign that doesn't have a dark background. So for example, one of my dad's all-time favorite pitchers is Ron Guidry. So in one of the videos I did before, I got Ron Guidry's autograph through the mail for my dad, and I went through a lot of cards looking online at different cards on which one I thought was a good pick. And then I ended up deciding on the 1984 Fleer Ron Guidry because the background isn't dark, so the autograph would really stand out. It's a shot where you can see him, but it's not so tight that he's signing his face. And it just seemed like the autograph would stand out on it. And so that's the card that I picked. So for me, if the autograph isn't super expensive, if the rookie card isn't super expensive, I'm going rookie card. If the rookie card is expensive, I'm looking for a card that doesn't have a dark background so the autograph stands out and it's not so tight of his face that he's signing on his face, but it's not so far back that you can't really see that it's him in the picture. So that's kind of my philosophy. I know it's complicated, but that's what I do when deciding which card to get autographed by someone.
Which of your videos episodes do you think is your best, and why do you think it's the best one?
I love this question. And one of the reasons I love this question is as a teacher, okay? So every day I get up in front of my students and I present information to them. And the way, before they leave, I always check for understanding. So I do something, a practice problem, or an example problem, or a homework problem, or something so that I can know whether or not they understood what I taught them. That way I can do a quick check by just walking through the room, looking to see that they got it or that they don't. But one thing I don't really get a good idea of is whether my students like what I taught them that day and like how I taught it to them. Because it's hard to get an honest opinion from a high school kid, right? So when I look at my videos, it's easy to get an honest opinion on what all of you think of it. And the way that I can figure out what everybody thought about it is how many people watched it and how many people shared it. Now, I'm always going to get some thumbs up from those of you that like me and want to give me a nice little thumbs up. And that feels good when I get thumbs up. I do genuinely appreciate that. And if you really like it, some of you are nice enough to leave me a comment and say, "This is a great video, Greg. Thank you. Appreciate it." And I'm always going to have a handful of people that are going to give me a thumbs down and say something negative. And that just kind of is to be expected. But I can tell what videos everybody likes by your responses. So I would generally lean toward the videos that have the most views and the most shares as my videos that you guys like the most. And that must be the best. Now, The most viewed video I've ever done is the one where my dad came home with that shoebox from the estate sale, and we go through them together looking at what's in there. Now, he gave it a once over before we went through, but we really went through it thoroughly together and laid them all out and looked at them one at a time. So that would maybe be my thought of what the best video is. I would then look at, well, what are some other popular ones? One of the really popular ones is when I said, hey, let's look at what some future Hall of Famers might be, because guys, cards values go way up when they get inducted to the Hall of Fame. So I thought that was a pretty good video. I also thought a good video was the time that I went through and really talked about the economics of sports cards, where it's talking about how demand affects prices and supply affects prices and vice versa. I thought that was a good video. But to me, the most important video might catch you by surprise. I think the video that I put out there that I thought was the best one, and the one that everyone should really watch if they're collectors, is about the 10 different PSA labels and the evolution of the PSA labels from the very first PSA holder to the current PSA holder, and how to determine which generation holder a PSA card is from. And the reason I think that that's important is because, as many people have pointed out, and as my videos that I've done recently have pointed out, it seems as if the difficulty from graders, whether it be SGC or PSA or any company, is getting more difficult. And so if it is getting more difficult, the cards that have been graded more recently versus the cards that were graded, 35 years ago when PSA really started, it's important to know when the card was graded. And as I pointed out in those videos, I do think it's important to also understand that some of the old grades do hold up. But generally speaking, generically speaking, if people do believe that card grading is getting tougher because of technology or whatever reason, I do think it's important to be able to date when a card was graded by looking at the holder that it's in. And I really think that's the best video, because I think if somebody really understands the 10 different labels and the evolution of the PSA labels and can date when a card was graded, it gives you an idea when buying a card through the mail, through an auction warehouse, the standard at which the card was graded by dating when it was graded. So that would probably be my pick of the most important video that I think everybody should see.
How has your father influenced your collecting? Do you collect what he hasn't, so if he passes his collection to you, there isn't duplication?
Man, this is such a good question, but it's such a hard question. And there's so many layers to it. How is my dad... Well, let's just start there. How's my dad influenced my collecting? Well, how's he not influenced my collecting? Number one, since I started collecting when I was so young, he really taught me about supply and demand. He really taught me about new cards being heavily produced and new cards being in better condition, that the high volume of newer cards and the commonality of how many of them are in good condition will likely result in many of them not maintaining value for a long time. And also the fact that buying prospects, which at the time were Walt Weiss, Todd Van Poppel, Greg Jeffries, guys like that. Insert name of rated rookie player here. Many of those would fade because they were prospects, and then, most prospects don't pan out. So he really influenced that. He also influenced me on, my dad from early on was really into condition, and the condition that affected him the most, that he was most focused on, was what did the card look like when it came out of the pack. So for example, centering has never bothered my dad as much as some people, but corners were super important to my dad. Print marks on a card never bothered him that much because that's how the card came out of the pack. He always tended to want cards that looked like they did when they came out of the pack. And if a card had something that happened in the factory, that didn't bother him as much as something that happened to a card after it came out of the pack. So I adopted a lot of those views and a lot of those opinions. And in doing that, in learning about the supply and demand stuff, it immediately steered me toward, Hall of Famers and vintage cards, because they were in shorter supply, because they were in high demand, but they would likely stay in high demand, and they would stay in a shorter supply than a 1988 Matt Noakes card, right? So he's obviously influenced my opinion a lot. Now, my dad and I do have some different interests as well. There's some stuff that I think that I buy, and my dad's like, okay, but for the most part, I think we have somewhat similar interests. Now, as far as duplication of stuff, that's a really hard question, because I'm not looking forward to the day that I, end up with, my dad's collection. Now, obviously, it'd be me and my brother would end up with my dad's collection. And I'm not planning on keeping every card in my dad's collection someday. I plan on finding, a couple to a handful of cards that I specifically remember looking at with my dad, experiencing with my dad having a lot of love for, keeping those cards. And then a fair amount of my dad's collection I anticipate liquidating to then buy some things that I know he would like me to acquire, because he knows that I have wanted those cards. So again, it is weird to think about and talk about, but it is something that I, at some point I'll have to deal with, hopefully well into the future. So, but to further answer the question, there are some cards that my dad has that I don't really feel like I need because my dad has them. But likewise, I know my dad feels that way about me. Like, there are some cards that I have, and my dad's been like, well, what do I need that card for? It's already in the family. You already have one. And it's like, yeah, that's kind of true. Like, part of having cards is being able to enjoy them whenever you want, look at them whenever you want. My dad lives like 3 miles from me. I could be to my dad's house in 5 minutes. So some of the cards that come to mind are like, he's got a really nice 1958 Topps Hank Aaron. Really like that card a lot. As much as I like that card, I don't feel like I need that card, because if I want to go look at that card and enjoy it, I just go over to my dad's house and look at that card and enjoy it. so it's kind of an interesting concept, but and then there are cards I know that he, like I said, I know he knows that I have. He's like, well, what do I need? What do I need a 1956 Ted Williams for? You have one. I can look at yours anytime. It's like, yeah, that's true, right? So there is a certain thing about not buying some of the stuff my dad already has, but I don't know if it's so much because someday I'll end up with some of it. It's like I don't need it because if I want to look at one and enjoy it and spend time looking through those cards, I can. I mean, he's got a sweet 1961 Juan Marichal rookie card. Because he has a really nice one, I don't really feel like I need to go buy one. But he does have cards that I've purchased. So if, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how to answer the question. I guess I'm answering the question, but it's a tough question to answer. So for the most part, yeah, if there's a card that my dad already has, generally speaking, I don't go buy one because we already have one. And I kind of look at our collections as like our collection. But yeah,